You know what can be hard to accept is that another nation, a powerful nation, is attacking you. It can be hard as Americans to accept that, and because we're going to talk about China here and how they're ingrained with us, but they're attacking us and how they're our enemy. And we have lived our lives. I lived 42 years, but it doesn't matter how old you are. Watching this show, you've lived your life knowing that America is relatively safe from attack. Now, I understand about 9/11. I understand about Pearl Harbor. I understand these attacks that have happened at various times, but I'm talking another nation state invading and attacking. We don't even think about such things. That's how other people in many countries around the world, that's how they have to live their lives every day. Every day they wake up, are we being invaded? But here in America, that's just not a thought we have, right? No one does that to us. We're so big, we're so powerful, we have these big oceans, we're fine, right? We're fine. But the truth is there are so many different ways to wage war. It's not all bombs and bullets and things like that. And let me tell you something before we get to China. In fact, this is going to come into play. This is a tale as old as time, but it is true. When you wage a war, before the bombs or bullets start flying, you can accomplish so much. In fact, you can win a war practically before anybody fires a shot. A real Sun Tzu type thinking there, as long as we're doing a Chinese special. What's a good example of this? Well, Genghis Khan is a great example. One of probably history's greatest general, if we're being honest, strategically. Guy comes in, he takes over really everything, just dominates everybody. But how did he do that? Is it just because him and his men were so tough, those Mongols? Well, yes, they were very tough, but the truth is, long before Genghis Khan showed up with his army outside of your city and battered down the walls and killed every man, woman, and child, Genghis Khan ensured that he would win. Do you know how he did this? It wasn't sexy. It wasn't arrows and swords and horses. Genghis Khan would infiltrate your city. He would send his men into your city, and what they would do is they would get involved in your economy, finding out what makes your economy go. What ways is your economy vulnerable? If there was, let's say, a fire that broke out at this factory, would it hurt your ability to defend yourself? His infiltrators would infiltrate the political process of your city. They would find out, what are these internal divisions? Do these guys hate these guys and those guys hate these guys? Hey, I wonder if we got involved and started making sure they really hate each other. I wonder if we could weaken the foundations of this place before the Mongol army ever showed up. You see, almost every time the Mongol intelligence service had won the war before the Mongolian hordes crossed the horizon. That's the truth. And that brings us to what China is doing here. China is not our ally. What's amazing about it is China doesn't really pretend to be our ally. They don't. China has published papers. We're not talking about secret communications we had to hack into and find here. China has published papers about their intention to take over as the number one power in the world. They've even given us dates practically. 50 years from now, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. China intends to win. And because they intend to win, they've already infiltrated this country in horrible ways. Why do you think America's politicians, Democrat and Republican, oftentimes say things like, they're not even competing with them?
Fact is that I have met with Xi Jinping more than any other world leader has. I've had over 68 hours of private meetings, just he and I with simultaneous interpreters. I spent a lot of time with Xi Jinping when I was vice president and subsequent to that. And he once asked me in the Tibetan Plateau, could I define America for him? And I mean it sincerely, not a joke. I said, yes, one word, possibilities. I've allegedly met more face-to-face with Xi Jinping than any world leader has. America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was in the foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping. I've spent a lot of time with Xi Jinping, someone whom I have a great deal of difference with. And I was When I was vice president, my president told me that he wanted me to get to know Xi Jinping because it was clear he was going to be the head of Russia, of China.
That's interesting, isn't it? We love China, spend so much time with China. But it's not just Joe Biden. I don't want you to think it's just a Joe Biden thing. I remember I had a guy, a Chinese expert, tell me one time, he said, you know what America's politicians, do you know what their reputation is in China? I said, what? What is it? He said, their reputation is they're cheap. Meaning China has already blackmailed and bribed our politicians. It's not just Joe Biden. Gavin Newsom, he loves meeting with Xi too.
But I want to applaud the Biden administration, and on the basis of the engagement I had today with members of the Xi administration, President Xi himself, I want to applaud his willingness to reconcile those differences, people-to-people exchange. The fact he's meeting with the governor of California at the subnational level, I think, is indicative of a thaw.
What a great guy, that Xi Jinping. How infiltrated are we? Well, I need to explain something to you. You know, the House of Representatives, they have different committees, right? There'll be the Ways and Means Committee, the Armed Services Committee, different committees. And they have an Intelligence Committee. If you ever find yourself on Capitol Hill, you'll know when you get by the House Intelligence Committee room. Why? It's the one that looks like Fort Knox. Endless security, screening to even get into there. Why is that the case? Because they discuss highly sensitive, highly classified information about the United States of America, our intelligence, our military capabilities, what we know about our enemies. Eric Swalwell sits on the House Intelligence Committee, and he slept with a Chinese spy.
Uncontradicted that the president used taxpayer dollars to ask the Ukrainians to help him cheat an election.
He also farted on television. Slept with a Chinese spy. He never got busted for it. She escaped, and he still sits on the House Intelligence Committee. And, you know, to wrap up my point here, because we have such a big show, we have so many guests I want to get to, maybe the best way I can explain this is, you know what a spy balloon is? You know what a spy balloon does? A spy balloon, it's very obvious. Obviously, it's above, it's overhead. It can take better pictures than a satellite can, because satellites are way, way up there, right? China sent a spy balloon to the United States of America. We detected this spy balloon over Alaska, over the Pacific Ocean. We knew all this. They told Joe Biden, they told military leadership that China was spying on us. This spy balloon, we now know, was doing figure eights over our military bases, gathering up all kinds of critical information. Not only did we not shoot it down until it made the Atlantic, when asked about it, the president tried to say, I don't know, is that some kid's balloon? It must be private.
The intelligence community's current assessment is that these three objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation or research institutions studying weather or conducting other scientific research.
Obviously, he's lying. You know that. Why would he lie? Why would the president, why would our military leadership allow the communist Chinese to spy so brazenly on us? Because they're all compromised. I'm worried that Genghis Khan already has his infiltrators here. And I worry what may happen one day when the Chinese hordes show up over the horizon. Are our own people going to open the gates? Certainly looks like it. Let's talk more about China and other things with Colonel Newsom in just a moment. All that may have made you uncomfortable, but I am right. We'll be back.
Remember they told us we were dead, manufacturers dead in America? China was going to eat our lunch? Well, guess what, man? We don't taste that good. So look, folks, I really mean.
Joining me now, Colonel Grant Newsom, former Reserve Head of Intelligence for Marine Forces Pacific, author of the book When China Attacks. Semper Fi, Colonel. Colonel, is China, quote, eating our lunch, at least when it comes to manufacturing?
Well, they're doing a pretty good job. If you don't believe me, just drive up to Baltimore or Youngstown, Ohio, or any major American city. See what's happened over the last 30 years. Yes, there's still manufacturing in the United States, but it's nothing like it was. They just moved too much of it to China, and we have problems aplenty because of that. So they're still doing very well. Wall Street may be finally starting to wake up. America's business class, well, you notice they gave Xi Jinping 2 standing ovations in November in San Francisco. They've got a ways to go.
Colonel, can you explain what China's naval shipbuilding capability is versus ours? Because as most people know, our naval ability in World War II is really what won the daggone thing for us.
Oh, yeah. Well, we still look at World War II and think because we did so well then that we're in great shape now. Such is not the case. China's shipbuilding capability is about 220 times more than ours. 220 times. That says everything. The Chinese have turned out about 5 or 6 ships for every one that we have over the last decade or so. Their navy's much bigger than ours now, and it's getting bigger. Ours is getting smaller. So this is something that's been allowed to happen, and we find ourselves in a very serious situation. We just can't build enough ships fast enough. We're not even close. And what happens if ships get sunk or if they need repaired? We don't have the shipyard capacity to handle any sort of a serious war.
And can you talk about that for a moment, Colonel? Because this is something people forget in peacetime, is if you go to war, they will get sunk. And they will need repairs. Half of our naval ability in World War II was being able to haul those bad boys back to California or Pearl Harbor and weld them up and get them back out there. Japan could not do that. We won, they lost. That's important, is it not?
Oh, that's the key to everything. We hear about how it's high-tech warfare these days and war is different. Well, no, it isn't. You get hit, you lose ships, you lose aircraft, you lose people by the thousands. And you've got to be able to absorb that. But we've adopted this just-in-time manufacturing for our military so that we thought we would have no enemies in the future. We just needed a few ships to come out, 1 or 2 a year. That would be plenty. And boy, did we get that wrong. And this isn't something that happened quickly. You could see it coming over the last 20, 30 years. But the thinking was, in both the civilian and the military, is that we will never face a serious enemy. And meanwhile, China, in plain view, built up their Navy and their Air Force and have reformed their militaries to the point it is a very serious threat.
Colonel, can you speak to the quality? We'll focus on the Navy for a moment, although you're obviously welcome to speak to their air power. What's the quality of these ships? It's one thing to churn out ships, but if they're a bunch of steamers, that's not going to get you very far. What are they making?
Well, unfortunately, they're making the most modern ships you can make. We often took a very condescending view of the Chinese, thinking, oh, they'll never be our equals. Well, here they are. Around 2009, the commander of PACOM, or U.S. Indo-PACOM, Admiral Keating, he was in China, and he was asked, what do you think about the Chinese having aircraft carriers? And he said, well, that sounds good to me, and I will be glad to help them as much as I can. The thinking was they would never, ever be America's equal in terms of a navy or any other form of military. And once again, they got that wrong. It turns out that China makes, as I said, first-class ships. Yes, they're not perfect, but they're certainly good enough, and in some cases they're better than ours. They seem to have less rust on them as well. And they've just got an awful lot of them, and they continue to build them out despite facing no enemies. So that ought to tell you something. But this is something we really ought to be afraid of. And do note that China generally introduces some new capability probably 10, 20 years before all of the so-called experts predicted that they would. And they have done this over and over and over.
What's their new capability we're worried about now?
Just about everywhere. Outer space, hypersonic missiles. It's just more missiles than you could shake a stick at. They're getting their anti-submarine warfare capabilities improved. They've got a ways to go, and our submarine force really is our ace in the hole. We could use a lot more subs, but it does give us a huge advantage. The Chinese know it. They are aware of sort of our strengths and are trying to counter them. And they are also building up their own capabilities. As I said, anti-submarine warfare is one. The ability to do joint operations farther afield from China, how to work in their space and their cyber, their missiles, all of these forces together, so that the parts are more than just the basic sum. They're figuring that out. As I say, they know their problems and they're trying to address them. Fortunately, they haven't worked all of them out. But this is something that we are suffering now from having sort of belittled the Chinese for too long. This isn't to say that we couldn't give them a real bloody nose right now, but the trends are not in the right direction. And if they chose their times and the spot, they could give us a very bloody nose, particularly if it's a fight near the Chinese mainland. Another thing also to consider is their aircraft carrier capabilities, the ability to conduct naval air operations. This is something that they thought they would never figure this out, which is going to take them too long. Well, they figured it out, and they're doing carrier operations east of Taiwan, south of Japan, in the areas where we are operating. They're not at our level yet, but as with a lot of things, give them time. And the point is that now we had better wake up and figure out how we are going to take them on and make it so they know that we can sink the entire Chinese Navy in an afternoon. We're not there yet.
Colonel, why haven't they taken Taiwan yet? We know they just had their election in Taiwan. It didn't go China's way. We think they're not going to let the Joe Biden presidency pass before they try something. Why haven't they done it yet?
Well, I don't know for sure. Xi Jinping hasn't told me, but I think they're ready. And I think what they're looking for is to particularly see what the United States might do. And they pay very close attention to the situation in the United States. And if they see us in chaos, fighting with each other, distracted, either domestically or, say, in Europe, the Middle East, well, the go signal sure looks like it's come on in that case. But if they see us as unwilling, unable to respond to an assault on Taiwan, then that is going to make it more likely that they do it. And I think that we really need to be very careful as to what happens starting about now, actually. And I think the closer we get to this election, and if there's rioting in American streets like there was in 2020, I think China will be sorely tempted. Xi Jinping has been trying to sanctions-proof his economy so that if there are financial and economic sanctions put on China as a result of going after Taiwan, well, they can absorb it. And he also knows that a good bit of the world, particularly the so-called third world or developing countries, is actually going to say, well, this is just a domestic matter. So they're not going to do much, or they might even support China on this. And in America, one can easily imagine a administration that doesn't want to have to deal with the potential of World War III. It's going to be able to think up all sorts of excuses not to respond to something China does. Wall Street is going to counsel, don't respond, the business class mostly as well. So China looks at all of this, and I don't think they have ever seen a better opportunity than now. And there's some debate over whether the People's Liberation Army is capable of conducting an all-out assault on Taiwan to seize the entire place. And as I say, there's debate, but I tend to think that they could easily think that they could do it based on the way their capabilities have developed.
Yeah. Colonel, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure, pleasure.
All right. There's so much more to get to. Hang on.
One of the things that balloon caused was not so much that it got shot down, but I don't think the leadership knew where it was and knew what was in it and knew what was going on.
A lot of people have forgotten, I have not forgotten, that the United States military, the United States government detected a Chinese spy balloon over Alaska, and they allowed it to traverse the entire United States of America, from what I understand, doing figure eights over our military bases, and they shot it down over the Atlantic, and the President of the United States of America claimed that China just lost it. It must have got caught in the winds or something like that. Jeez. Joining me now, Brigadier General Anthony J. Tata, author of the book, The Phalanx Code. General, do you think China just lost their balloon? Was it just too windy that day and they kind of lost control of the string they were holding? Is that what happened?
Jesse, happens all the time, man. Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, this president, if his lips are moving, he's most likely not telling the truth or doesn't know what he's saying. It's insane. China is spying on us. They're doing it in every way possible, from the air, from satellites, from cyber world, with all these Confucius institutes they have in all our school systems, through education. They have a full court press on stealing IP from the United States and defense secrets.
General, can you speak to the civilian who doesn't know right now? It can get confusing to understand what kind of information would even benefit you if you're China from, let's say, a satellite or a balloon, some kind of overhead reconnaissance like that of the United States of America, to the person who's not like you, doesn't necessarily have a military mind. What are they getting from any of this? Why does it matter?
Yeah, sure. Great question. And so depending upon the payload, what the balloon was carrying, for example, or even a satellite, a balloon can get much closer, obviously, than a satellite. It followed a path over all of our many of our nuclear weapons locations and military bases that have nuclear capability. There's a nuclear triad. It's no big secret. You've got missiles, you've got airplanes, you have submarines. And the airplanes and missiles were sort of right in the direct path of where this balloon traversed and loitered over military bases. And, it could have had a signals intelligence platform intercepting signals. It could have obviously had imagery, taking pictures. And what they do is they count and they see, okay, they have X number of nuclear missiles. We need Y. Or if we're going to do an attack on this area, we need to be able to disable X number of nuclear missiles before they can shoot back. And so that's how they get that precise information. It was not a benign event. It's a very serious event, and I'm glad that you're still talking about it.
General, could you talk about signals intelligence, which you just brought up, because that went right over so many people's heads. What is it, and is China good at it?
China's the best at it, and what signals intelligence is, anytime you're talking on any kind of communications device, whether that's in the cyber world or over a landline phone or a cell phone, China's really good at stealing, listening into that information. It's not hard, obviously, to listen into some generic cell phone conversation. With encryption, it gets harder. With landlines, it gets harder. And depending upon, again, what this balloon was carrying, called the payload, they could listen in, they could decipher, they could steal information, they could capture that through the abilities of some of the ways that they can transmit signals down and disrupt communications. They could be testing, can they disrupt the nuclear launch system? And if they get a balloon over us or if they get a satellite over us, can they disrupt the ability of these nuclear weapons to deploy should they attack us first? There's so many different permutations of this imagery, taking pictures, stealing conversations, signals intelligence, essentially, and then putting all that together to say, here's how we neutralize this specific military base from counterattacking if we attack first.
Let's focus on that for a moment, General, because that's something Americans have been thankfully protected from, attacks on our mainland. Obviously, we know about 9/11, we know about Pearl Harbor, but any kind of a significant large-scale attack on our mainland is not something that's happened since we were fighting the Mexicans, and that's just not something that we've ever had to deal with here. That's not something China would consider, right? And that's not something they could do?
Yeah, so China's a bad actor in the national defense strategy, and certainly, I believe that to be the case. The ability, what they want is leverage, right? So they want to know where all our people are, where they want to know where all our nuclear weapon systems are. They want to know what our capability is, and that gives them leverage to negotiate. Now, do I believe that China is going to attack the United States? I don't believe that, not in the near term anyway, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. What having all this information does for them is it gives them leverage and say, hey, look, you're overmatched. We've already built Y number of nukes. Y is greater than X. You only have X here. We can launch these before you have a chance to respond, and we figured out how to neutralize your ability to launch your missiles. And so talk to us. Let's have a conversation about these sanctions or where you're putting pressure here, or let's do an economic deal and make it a little bit more favorable to us. And that's the geopolitics that I think is happening here with these balloons and satellites and all of that.
How are we doing when it comes to coming up with defenses for this? You've said they're the best at things like signals intelligence, and I've heard that many times as well. How are we doing? Are we way behind, a little behind? Are we a near peer? How are we doing when it comes to countering this stuff?
I think, again, great question. I think it depends, Jesse, on what vertical you're looking at. Obviously, we have a nuclear agreement with Russia that has constrained our nuclear arsenal. China is not part of that nuclear agreement. And certainly when I was the Undersecretary of Defense, I was trying to get China to come into that because they are growing at a very rapid rate and could surpass us in many different respects with capability. So then you get at, that's offensive capability. Then you get at our defensive capability, and we've got some work to do. And certainly it costs a lot of money to be able to knock these things out of the sky, or however we address them. And there's hard choices being made by people that perhaps don't understand the threat the same way that you and I do. But I think we have some work to do there.
General, I'm concerned, as many are, I'll wrap up with this one, about how many military-age Chinese nationals are coming across our southern border. This is something that I've been seeing a ton of. And I'm not just worried about it for, the welfare and all that other stuff. I'm worried because I'm thinking to all the military studs I know. I'm not one, but the ones I know. And I've asked them all, if you had 6 months, if you had a year with a 20-year-old Chinese national, how much pain could you teach him to inflict on this country from the inside? And General, I've gotten some truly frightening answers from my friends. Are you backing them up on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think whether it's Chinese nationals or other bad actors or them acting in concert, that's the thing of used to be the thing of fiction novels, but today it's real. This border, they talk about X number coming across the border. It's X plus something, because they're not seeing everything, and so what we have is a situation where you have all these military age males from a variety of different, you even have Hamas and Hezbollah coming across. You have Chinese coming across. And, it's not that big of an issue for a Chinese person to get in the United States and, become a student or whatever. So why are these people coming across the border? And, I can only think of one, maybe two reasons, and they're both bad reasons that they're going to inflict harm on this country. And it would not take long to train somebody if they're not already trained after they get across the border.
General, that was just awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I mean, it was scary, but it was awesome. It was great information, was it not? Peter Schweizer is going to join us next. Senate Majority Leader waving a Chinese flag. And we are in trouble, are we not? Let's talk to Peter about that. Joining me now, Peter Schweizer, author of a cool new book with a sick name. The book is called Blood Money. It's all about China and why these people were constantly knifing the American people in the back for China. Okay, Peter, it's not just that they're okay with China. The people who run this country seem to really prefer them over us.
Yeah, they want to imitate them in some respects. We certainly saw that during COVID. You see that in the discussions about economics. And, you know, as I point out in the book, Chinese internal communications, they talk about the fact that while the Communist Party of the USA is very small and insignificant, they do see people like Bernie Sanders and AOC as vehicles. You know, imperfect vehicles, but vehicles nonetheless. So, yeah, this is a ideological joining, as it were, with certain elements of the Democratic Party and the CCP.
Peter, some of this stuff looks like it's at the highest levels, and it's difficult to kind of decipher what you're looking at. When the President of the United States of America gets word there's a Chinese spy balloon over the Pacific, and he doesn't shoot it down until it's over the Atlantic, a lot of people, especially given his business dealings, start asking themselves, is he compromised? Is he allowed to shoot that down?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question to have. I mean, as I've documented beginning in 2018, the Biden family has received some $30 million from Chinese businesses for really no services, like legitimate business services in return. So you have to ask yourself, what are they being paid that money for? Why did the money continue to arrive? As I point out in the new book, Blood Money, part of the problem is we face a fentanyl crisis in America, and that is really caused by China. This is more about China than it is about the Mexican drug cartels. The problem is that the Chinese drug lord that kind of made this happen, his name is White Wolf. He's the head of a Chinese criminal syndicate that set up the Sinaloa cartel and the fentanyl trade. He had a business partner, and White Wolf's business partner sent the Bidens $5 million. So does Joe Biden really want to have a conversation about China's involvement in the fentanyl crisis? No, he probably doesn't. So you really have one degree of separation between the Biden family, the first family of the United States, and these drug dealing syndicates. And that's one of the reasons he, I believe, doesn't want to discuss this issue or others related to China.
Peter, now everyone knows the Communist Party of China runs everything there, and they insist on running everything there. So how is it a powerful drug-dealing criminal organization could exist without Xi Jinping knowing about it?
That's right, Jesse. They couldn't. And in fact, as I point out in the book, President Xi has a long association with Chinese organized crime. He has family members who are involved in it. But more to the point, his political rise in China within the CCP, the place that he spent more time than any was Fujian province. Fujian province in China is the heartbeat of Chinese organized crime. Those are criminal gangs that operate in the United States, but they operate protectively in Fujian province. And during his tenure as the leader there were many criminal gangs who had leaders who were wanted in the United States, and President Xi protected them. And basically the bargain that the CCP and Chinese organized crime have made is, as long as Chinese organized crime is patriotic, meaning they support the CCP will allow them to operate and do whatever they want outside of China. And that's kind of a bargain that has worked to the advantage of both. The organized crime syndicates get rich, and the Chinese government, the CCP, of course, benefits from the chaos and the destruction that those criminal syndicates reap on the United States and the Western world.
Peter, is that why we haven't done anything about the source of all this fentanyl? I mean, it's made in China. Yes, comes into America through Mexico, kills over 100,000 Americans a year. But can't we do something to stop it from getting to Mexico? Why haven't we?
Oh, absolutely we can. I mean, as I point out in the book, China's involved in every step of the phase. People know about the precursors going into Mexico, but 90% of those precursors go through the port of Manzanillo in Mexico. Guess what? That port terminal is run by a Chinese company. And people wonder, why can't we stop this fentanyl from arriving? When it arrives in that port terminal, Jesse, they send it up north to a town in northern Mexico, where according to our Department of Homeland Security, there's 2,000 Chinese nationals living in this town in Mexico, helping the cartels create this poison. They need pill presses now to turn this fentanyl into pills that they're going to sell on the street. They get the pill presses from China. The Chinese government sells it to the Mexican cartels at cost. They're not even, trying to profit off of it. Now that the cartels have these pills, Jesse, and they need to distribute them in the United States, they need secure communications. What do they use? They use Chinese apps and Chinese communication devices because they know that the Chinese government will not share that information with U.S. law enforcement. And then finally, these drug cartels have made all this money selling this poison in the United States. Where do they launder the money? The cartels used to launder it in Latin American banks. They now launder it in Chinese state-owned banks, and they are aided by Chinese students in the United States on education visas. So this is a Chinese operation through and through. The Mexican cartels are junior partners, and absolutely it can be stopped if we had leadership in Washington to do it.
Golly. Peter, what's disintegration warfare?
Disintegration warfare is the Chinese doctrine for waging war against the United States without actually appearing to wage war. I mean, in other words, it's we're going to defeat you without actually having a shooting war with you. And they're quite sophisticated about this. Part of this is fentanyl. Part of it is sending these small devices that are called Glock switches. They convert a Glock handgun into a machine gun, highly illegal. Well, China has been smuggling these into the United States since 2018, Jesse, and they're targeting these devices for criminal syndicates in the United States to give them more firepower against the United States. It also includes political chaos. Some of the radical groups in 2020 that were, pushing the violent BLM type protests, some of the ones leading the pro-Hamas protests now, these are organizations like FRSO, PSL, that have very close relationships with Beijing. So disintegration warfare is a way, their strategy, to defeat us without actually appearing to fight us.
Peter, what do they get out of criminals having machine guns on the streets? It seems like an odd thing to people who don't understand how these communists operate. How does that help China to have a bunch of gangbangers mowing down cops here in America?
Well, number one, it creates a lot of chaos, a lot of social turmoil. And the second thing it does is it gives them something to advertise. If you go on Chinese state media, they're running all kinds of stories about, look at what's going on in America. There's machine gun fire in the street. This is like Al Capone in the 1930s. What they leave out of the story, Jesse, is the origins of those devices that create the machine guns, which they provided into the United States. So it's a propaganda theme, but it's also chaos and social division. They believe that the more turmoil there is in the United States, the weaker that we are, the less capable we are of resisting what China might be doing around the globe and might want to do towards the United States. And I have to say, they're right, Jesse. I mean, it makes sense. Abraham Lincoln said a house divided itself cannot stand. Certainly, if you've got a lot of internal turmoil and chaos, you're going to be less resilient in trying to confront foreign enemies. And that's precisely what's happening in this case.
It is. That's cool. The book is Blood Money. It's fascinating information, Peter. I'm glad you wrote the book. The book is Blood Money. I encourage everyone, go find out what they're doing to us with the aid of American politicians. All right. We have final thoughts. Next. Look, we have to acknowledge that we're under attack. That's the first thing. And that gets so difficult, it gets so complicated because our economies, us and China, they're so intertwined now because our political leadership decided we were going to enrich the Chinese. Now we exist on cheap Chinese goods. China exists on us buying cheap Chinese goods. but the relationship is so hostile. How do we start separating from each other? Well, one of the best ways to start separating is acknowledging that we're enemies. We should be running Confucius Institutes out of this country. If we had any federal law enforcement arm, which we obviously do not, we have the Cheka, and they're not good for anything. So after we defund and eliminate the FBI, we actually need some sort of federal law enforcement action focusing exclusively on American politicians and how many have been bribed and blackmailed by communist China. We need to start focusing on American media organizations who exist on Chinese dollars. Hollywood on Chinese dollars. We have got to begin uprooting the communist Chinese from our presence, and we can't do this passively. This has to be something we're aggressive about because the enemy is already in the gates. And let's remember something. China, to their credit, I hate saying that, but to their credit, China is so clear-eyed about who their enemy is, about what they intend to do, how they intend to win. We aren't. We can't get our politicians, especially our Democrat politicians, to speak boldly about any of this stuff. How many have been bought off? Far too many. It's going to take time to clean out this much corruption, but we had better begin because the communist Chinese are not relenting and they will not give up until they're number one. All right? All right. We'll do it again.